Our next session, or next presentation in this session, is from Major General the Honourable Paul Brereton, who has had a storied career in the law and in the Army Reserve. And you can read all the details in the notes that you've got. So I won't run through every one of his postings. General Brereton has not only had a starring pair of careers in the Army and the law, but has also found time to do some pretty important military history study. So with that in mind, we're going to hear what he has to say about the 2nd 4th Battalion in New Guinea. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you all so much. Good morning, and it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity of doing what I regard as discharging the sacred trust of the Royal New South Wales Regiment, that trust being to honour those who served in the battles that earned the honours that the regiment now carries and inherits. I try to do this as efficiently as I can. I'm working off a tablet since I failed to be able to print my presentation for me to read from, but we'll see how we go. This image depicts the signage that formerly resided at the Pheasant's Nest road stop on the motorway from Melbourne as you approach Sydney, which was relocated on the 17th of May this year, having been replaced there, to the headquarters of the 4th 3rd Battalion at Sutherland. That marked the anniversary almost to the day of Private Edward Kenner's heroics on the 14th of May 1945 in the capture by the 2nd 4th Australian Infantry Battalion of Wirrawee Mission near Wewak, for which he received the Victoria Cross. That was part of the Artape Wewak campaign, the final Australian military campaign on mainland New Guinea. It ran from November 1944 to the war's end in August 1945. One of the so-called forgotten campaigns, it was fought by the 6th Division Australian Imperial Force with air and naval support. Like all of the jungle campaigns, it was challenging and casualties mounted steadily from battle and disease. Today I'll give an account of that campaign with a focus on the role of the 2nd 4th Battalion, and I think you will hear in what I have to say many parallels with and similarities with the presentation you've just heard on Bougainville. I acknowledge my main sources: the battalion's history, White Over Green, Colonel Keogh's seminal work on the Southwest Pacific, General Maitland's Tales of Valour and Battle History of the Regiment, and some personal correspondence with Ned Kenner's son, Mr. Rob Kenner. For those who might not be familiar, a quick outline. The infantry battalions of the 2nd AIF initially started with a strength of about 900 when first raised for the Middle East. By the time of the Pacific campaign, generally their authorised strength was about 800. They were organised into a headquarters company and 4 rifle companies, each with an establishment strength of about 100. The 2nd 1st, 2nd 2nd, 2nd 3rd and 2nd 4th battalions were of New South Wales origin, the 2nd, 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th of Victorian origin, the 9th, 10th and 11th, 12th from the other states. They reflected the similarly numbered regiments of the battalions of the 1st AIF. Initially, when the 16th Brigade, well, when the 6th Australian Division was established, the New South Wales brigades, the New South Wales battalions, 1st, 2nd, 3rd and 4th, formed the 16th Brigade. The 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th, the 17th Brigade. En route to the Middle East, they were reorganised. The brigades were reduced from 4 battalions to 3. The result of that was that the 2nd, 4th moved from the 16th Brigade to the 19th Brigade. The 2nd, 4th served with distinction in the Middle East, earning the battle honours described on this slide. Subsequently, after the entry of Japan into the war, it returned to Australia and, unlike the other brigades of the 6th Division, did not deploy to New Guinea, but was sent to Darwin, ultimately to the Atherton Tablelands, where, after the other brigades of the division returned from New Guinea, the division reconstituted. This plaque at Wandekla on the Atherton Tablelands marks the divisional area occupied by the 6th Division, including the 19th Brigade there. A long period of training ensued as the division was reconstituted. Eventually, the division was committed to relieve the Americans in Aitape from November 1944. The 2nd 4th Battalion embarked for New Guinea aboard the United States transport City of Mexico on the 28th of October 1944 and landed at Aitape on the 31st of October. Following the American victories at Salamoa, following the Australian victories at Salamoa, Lae and Finchhaven, American forces had bypassed the Japanese 18th Army base at Wewak in early 1944, taking Aitape, developing a base there and repulsing a major Japanese attack. The Americans were content to hold Aitape and not advance far towards Wewak. As preparations began for the drive to the north, it was decided that the defence of the area would be passed to Australian forces to release the American troops who General Douglas MacArthur wished to employ elsewhere. In mid-1944, MacArthur secured an agreement from the Australian government for Australian forces to take over at Aitape. On the 12th of July, MacArthur issued a directive to General Blamey providing for a redistribution of forces in the Southwest Pacific to enable forces to continue the offensive. It included that Australian forces should assume responsibility for the continued neutralisation of the Japanese in the Northern Solomons from the 1st of October and in New Britain and Australian New Guinea from the 1st of November 1944. Blamey allocated this task to the 1st Australian Army under Lieutenant General Sturdy. Its instructions to Sturdy of the 11th of August included to relieve the United States forces at Aitape, defend the airstrip and base area, and by patrol activity maintain contact with the enemy in the Wewak area, but the commitment of major forces was to be avoided. This was presumably because it was then still contemplated that the 6th Division would be required further afield. The most significant topographical feature in the Aitape-Wewak area is the continuous coastal dividing range, which runs roughly parallel to the coast. The peaks are roughly 20 kilometres inland. Towards the east, they converge to within 6 kilometres of Wewak. Averaging from 1,500 metres in height, they consist of very rugged and steep systems of heavily wooded ridges intersected by deep gorges. The northern slopes pitch steeply down to the narrow coastal plain. The sparsely populated coastal plain is low-lying, swampy, heavily wooded, and intersected by numerous streams liable to flood. Sturdy's operation instruction of the 18th of October to Major General Stevens, commanding the 6th Division, was somewhat more ambitious than those he had received from Blamey. He tasked the 6th Division not only to defend the airfield and radar installation at Aitape and to prevent movement westward of the Japanese forces, but also to seize every opportunity for the destruction of those forces. After establishing themselves, 19th Brigade was initially tasked with securing the area around the Drumanur, Danmap and Danamui rivers. 2nd 4th Battalion secured the vicinity of the Drumanur River mouth. On the 12th of November, they commenced to move further east to Babiang. This image shows Alpha Company crossing the Nigia River on the 17th of November. In many places, the going was extremely difficult as the Japanese had felled coconut palms across the sand at 3-metre intervals. Then they undertook a vigorous patrolling program, with the result that by the 15th of December, no Japanese remained west of the Danmap River. General Stevens then proposed to cut the Abao Marlin Wallam Ammon track, which the Japanese were using as a line of communications between their troops in the coastal area and the food-producing areas south of the ranges, and to destroy the enemy on the coast between the Danmap River and Marlin. The plan was approved by Sturdy and then Blamey. The 2nd 4th crossed the Danmap River on the 17th of December. It was in high flood with a very strong current, but there was only a very minor loss of equipment, a remarkable achievement. Between then and the 23rd of December, there were a number of engagements in which the battalion lost 11 killed in action and 16 wounded, meanwhile inflicting 98 enemy killed in action, 9 wounded and capturing 5 prisoners. The brigade continued eastward against minor opposition, and by the 19th of January the objectives had been secured without any major action, though there were some brisk minor engagements. On 24th of January, 19 Brigade was relieved by 16 Brigade and returned to securing the defensive position. Towards the end of January, Stevens sought permission to engage in a more vigorous offensive to destroy the enemy in the Wewak area. Although told by Sturdy to avoid a major engagement since no reinforcements or additional resources were available, on the 15th of February he issued an operation instruction stating his intention to be to capture Boot, Dagua and Wewak. On the 17th of March, 16 Brigade occupied Boot, and on 21 March cleared Dagua, where Lieutenant Albert Chown of the 2nd Australian Infantry Battalion, who'd earlier received a military medal, earned a posthumous Victoria Cross on the 25th of March. Meanwhile, to secure the right flank, 17th Brigade advanced through Balef to Maprik and reached the Nainab River by the end of March. Logistics were presenting ever more increasing difficulties, and if the Americans withdrew more aircraft for use in the Philippines, which was likely, the division would have had to withdraw to Artapane. The alternative was to continue to Wewak, capture of which would enable Stevens to avoid the long, tenuous lines of communication to Artapane. On the 19th of March, Blamey, visiting the area, decided that the advance to Wewak would continue. On the 7th of April, General Stevens ordered Brigadier King, commander of the 16th Brigade, to take Karawap and Boykin and establish a bridgehead over the Hawaiian River. Those tasks were achieved by the 2nd 1st, 2nd 2nd and 2nd 3rd Battalions as depicted on this map. On the 27th of April, the 2nd 2nd Battalion assumed the lead and crossed the Hawaiian River. By now, the 16th Brigade had been in action for more than 3 months. On the 2nd of May, 19th Brigade took over the advance with orders issued on the 27th of April to destroy the enemy in the Cape Wam Yarrabos area and clear the enemy from Ranamboa, seize the tracks south of the Wirrawee mission and destroy the enemy in the area around Wewak. On the 3rd of May, the 2nd 4th Battalion advanced forward from the Hawaiian River, led by its Delta Company and supported by a troop of the 2nd 4th Armoured Regiment. Progress of approximately 10 kilometres was achieved, despite an engagement in which 5 Japanese were killed. The following day, the battalion reached Cape Wam, and by nightfall had patrols on the Wirinji River. And so the Australian advance closed on Wewak in early May 1945. Wee-Wack, viewed here from Wirrawee Missions, which will return, was in many ways the highlight of this campaign. It was the last sea-based fortress of the Japanese in New Guinea. By this time, the Japanese strength there was estimated as being up to 1,000 personnel. As described in the 2nd 4th Battalion's history, Wee-Wack was going to be a hard nut to crack. It jutted out 2,000 yards from a low-lying coastline and was like Gibraltar in miniature. Only one approach for the attack was possible, along a 20-yard wide strip of sand, which was limited to one side by the sea and merging into tangled mangroves on the other. The point was fringed with coral reef and at sea level with a narrow shelf on which a road was built. Coral cliffs rising sheerly beside the road, making a plateau of the point. Controlling the approaches was a narrow coral knoll approximately 8 feet, 2.5 metres high, running east-west. This feature in turn was overlooked from the high ground overlooking the plateau. The enemy had taken full advantage of the dominating ground and sighted weapons in such ways to make an attack appear suicidal. Pillboxes built were blasted into the coral face and reinforced with concrete, while bunkers built in the open were protected with as much as 6 feet of overhead cover. Huge caves had been dug into the cliffs, in some cases to a depth of 200 feet, 60 metres, with smaller caves linked by subterranean passages. In some instances, the caves were strengthened with concrete to a depth of 12 feet and braced with timber supports. The terrain dictated that the attack had to be entrusted to a single battalion. The sea, the river and the swamps, and the narrow isthmus in particular, precluded the deployment of more. This would be the 2nd 4th. It was a challenging task. Despite aerial photography, the new commanding officer, Colonel Cox, could ascertain little about the dispositions on the approaches and even less about the defences. Patrols reconnoitred the defences, in particular to see whether Minga Creek, just short of Wee-Wack Point, was defended. By the end of 7 May, Captain Smith's Alpha Company had occupied Yarrabos. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Germany surrendered and the war in Europe came to an end. On the 8th of May, following a bombing of the peninsula by 12 Beauforts, Bravo Company, supported by artillery, tanks, mortars, machine guns and flamethrowers, crossed Minga Creek, depicted here, in assault boats, and secured a 270-metre deep beachhead, where it came under small arms fire and then fire from a 70mm gun, which continued throughout the night, killing 4 and inflicting numerous casualties. With intelligence indicating that the Japanese might abandon Wee-Wack to withdraw into the mountains, Colonel Cox gave his orders for the attack to take place on the 10th of May, after breakfast on the 9th of May, using this mud model built by the intelligence section. Later, subordinate officers and NCOs would use it to gain an appreciation of the terrain. During the afternoon, the battalion was concentrated near a bridge which the engineers had already built over Minga Creek for the tanks to cross. HR was initially set for 5:23 on the 10th of May, but visibility was so impaired for the tanks by heavy rain and the darkness that it was deferred until 6:10. The preparatory bombardment commenced at 0555. On HR, Captain Hawke's D Company and the tanks of 13 Troop 2nd 4th Armoured Regiment crossed the LD. Captain Atkinson's B Company and its support tanks from 14 Troop followed 10 minutes later. This image depicts troops from the 2nd 4th Battalion attacking around Wee-Wack with tank support that day. Despite the artillery barrage of 2,700 rounds, D Company immediately came under fire from a heavy machine gun in the pillbox, firing straight down the track across the isthmus. The ground prevented any deployment to the flanks, but with the skillful use of covering fire, especially from the tanks which suppressed the machine gun, the company managed to get forward. Once on solid ground, the company deployed, and with the tanks helping to destroy strong points, overran its objectives. Meanwhile, B Company came under heavy fire from numerous caves in the escarpment of Wee-Wack Point. Again with the support of tanks, each of the caves was cleared, and by 8 AM the whole of Wee-Wack Point had been captured. Alpha and Charlie companies were brought forward to do the mopping up, which was extensive, including many pillboxes and caves. Many of the Japanese strong points were located in deep caves and had to be dealt with by the tanks or with flame throwers, and some only cleared at bayonet point. This image is of a section of C Company at Wewak. By nightfall, resistance had ceased, although numerous small parties of Japanese troops sought to escape through the Australian positions after dark. 5 Australians and up to 2,000 Japanese were killed in the fighting for Wewak. The capture of Wewak Point by a single battalion was a truly conspicuous feat of arms. Following an inspection of the fortress, Blamey described its capture as a highlight of the New Guinea campaign and a magnificent achievement brought about by courage and detailed planning. The battalion's medical officer, Captain Williams, who would later be tragically killed at Mount Tazaki, after describing the strength of the defences, wrote of the men of his battalion, "They just moved through it all. Their very courage, discipline and training carried them on to their objectives." I think it's interesting just to contrast the success of Wewak, 5 Australians lost in that, with earlier episodes such as Boona, Gona and the like. What made the difference? Certainly the Japanese were weakened, they were tired, exhausted, but they were just as fanatic at Wewak as they had been earlier. One of the really significant signs to me is the effective use of combined arms, especially if you get across the isthmus, the use of the tanks, flamethrowers and direct fire support to suppress the machine guns that would otherwise have made that impossible seems to me to have been the key to it. Alongside what Captain Williams described, that these troops were now very, very experienced after a campaign in the Middle East. On the afternoon of the 11th of May, the battalion wheeled inland towards Wewak Airfield, where it came under artillery and machine gun fire from Wirrawee Mission. The airfield was captured without opposition on the 12th of May. The next major task would be the capture of Wirrawee Mission, built on top of a 91-metre high hill which dominated the airstrip. On the 14th of May, Commander 19th Brigade Brigadier Martin ordered the 2nd Corps to take Wirrawee Mission. By noon, Colonel Cox had issued orders for a 3-phase leapfrogging attack. C Company was to take the first objective, the intermediate feature, the northernmost of the blue circles. A Company would then pass through and take the second objective, and the main Wirrawee feature, and finally B Company would capture the pimple or bump feature, a small knoll on the western end of the feature. Following an artillery bombardment, C Company attacked just after 2 p.m. While opposition was relatively light, the heat was stifling and visibility limited. Tall Guinea grass on the hill made the going slow and the Japanese bunkers hard to locate. The company secured its objective about halfway up the northeast slope within half an hour. A Company then passed through. Its company commander, Captain Smith, was dissatisfied with the preparatory bombardment and ordered it to be repeated. The company then advanced and carried the assault onto the mission, which it secured just after 3 p.m, just an hour after HM. Due to the late hour, it was suggested by Smith and agreed by Cox that A Company should also take B Company's objective. But very stubborn resistance was encountered from the bump, and little headway was made against well-sighted bunkers. At nightfall, A Company was ordered to hold where it was. Resuming the attack the next morning, A Company continued to make slow progress against the bunkers on the bump. An artillery barrage was called on the bunkers and then 8th Platoon was sent forward to renew the attack. Corporal Needs' 5 section was to give covering fire while the other 2 sections assaulted, but it was impossible to find an effective supporting position due to its depressed location, exposed location and the thick Guinea grass. Meanwhile, a previously unlocated machine gun opened fire, wounding 2 men and pinning down the assaulting sections. This difficult situation was resolved by Private Edward Kenner, who'd been posted to the 2nd Force when it was training in the Atherton Tablements. On his own initiative and without orders, Kenner stood up in full view of the enemy less than 50 yards away and engaged the bunker, firing his Bren gun from the hip. The enemy machine gun immediately returned fire with such accuracy that bullets passed between his arms and his body. Undeterred, he remained completely exposed and continued to fire at the enemy until his magazine was exhausted. He then called for a comrade to pass a rifle up to him, which occurred, and Kenner, with amazing coolness, shot and downed the gunner with his first round. He then took up the Bren again while standing and engaged another heavy machine gun which had been firing from a position 70 yards away to the left. The citation for his VC concludes, the result of Private Kenner's magnificent bravery in the face of concentrated fire was that the bunker was captured without further loss and the company attack proceeded to a successful conclusion, many enemy being killed and numerous automatic weapons captured. This image is a Japanese photograph of the gun that Kenner would subsequently engage. Today it's at the headquarters of the 4th 3rd Battalion of the Royal New South Wales Regiment at Sutherland. Following the action at Wirrawee Mission, the battalion continued clearance operations. It captured Koigan in the foothills and was then ordered to capture, or the brigade was ordered to capture Mounts Tazaki and Shirabangu. The topographical challenges will be clear from the contours on the map and precluded the use of tanks. On the 5th of June, A Company of the 2nd Force moved out along the track to attack strong on the steep northern spur of Mount Kwakabu on the approaches to Mount Tazaki. An artillery concentration on the objective was followed by A Company advancing up the steep spur to the position. Good progress was made until about 40 metres short of the position, when it was seen that the large knoll at the top of the spur was bounded by sheer re-entrance on the east and west. With 7 and 9 platoons providing covering fire, Lieutenant Whiteside led his 8th platoon forward up the only approach, throwing grenades to gain the enemy positions. Once again, Kenner dashed forward to engage from the cover of a fallen tree. But as he set up his Bren to return fire, he was engaged from a previously unsighted position and hit in the lower face and neck, tearing flesh down to his shoulder and exiting out his chest. At this point, Whitehouse ran forward, throwing grenades, and pushed Kenner aside to take up the position behind the Bren, but not knowing where the fresh engagement was coming from, he too was hit. The position was gained, but Whiteside died of his wounds the following day. According to his son Robert, years later, Kenner said with great emotion, "Only for Whitey, I would have copped the next burst, so I owe my life to him. That's the way war goes." Robert took this to show that even VC recipients can have their own heroes, and relates that Kenner always said of his VC, "Actually, it's not mine. I wear it for all who fought side by side in all campaigns." Ultimately, responsibility for the capture of Mount Shirabangu was allocated to the 2nd 8th, and the 2nd Force was to take Mount Tazaki. After further fighting between the 19th of June and the 24th of June, the Mount Tazaki was captured on the afternoon of the 24th of June. That would be the 2nd Force's last major action. On the 5th of July, Prime Minister John Curtin died. On the 15th of August, when word was received that the war with Japan was over, Colonel Cox declared all work cancelled for the day and everyone gathered around the Salvation Army wireless. Men who were eligible for discharge began returning to Australia in drafts after September. The battalion was disbanded at Chermside in Queensland on the 12th of November. During its service, a total of 2,624 men served with the battalion, of whom 94 were killed, 243 wounded, and 195 captured. In addition to Kenner's Victoria Cross, members of the battalion received 1 Distinguished Service Order, 9 military crosses, 6 Distinguished Conduct Medals, 11 military medals, and 53 mentions and dispatches. 2 members of the battalion were appointed members of the Order of the British Empire. Aitape-Wewak was an arduous, frustrating and costly campaign. The 6th Division suffered 1,583 battle casualties, 442 killed and 1,141 wounded. But it also incurred a total of 16,203 non-battle casualties. The 6 battle honours earned during the campaign by the New South Wales Infantry battalions have been inherited, along with the traditions of those battalions, by the Royal New South Wales Regiment, which, as I've said, I regard as a sacred trust. Colonel Keogh, a distinguished military historian, argues that there were very few military reasons to support the campaign. The Japanese could not mount an offensive and showed no intent of doing so. Their defeat on the macro scale was now almost certain and would be decided elsewhere, and there was no need to do anything other than containment. Neither the government nor the people of the United States would likely be impressed by this quite unimportant mopping up campaign as far as they were concerned, while the decision was being won by their own troops elsewhere. Yet the campaign drew resources and, more importantly, cost limbs and lives. Politically and strategically, he concludes, the Aitape-Wewak offensives achieved nothing that could not have been achieved at far less cost. But others argue that despite the probability of victory, overall victory against Japan still seemed a long way off in early 1945. Nothing was then known of the atomic bomb. On the other side of the world, with their V-2 rocket, the Germans appeared to have a scientific edge and were having some success with their counter-offensive in the Ardennes. The alternative of the Australian Army confining itself to already captured areas and living alongside the Japanese in cohabitation on the northern coast of New Guinea was a militarily objectionable concept which would have become unacceptable while the British in Burma and the Americans in the Pacific were involved in very heavy fighting to push the Japanese back. Australia also had a responsibility to free its mandated territories from enemy occupation, to relieve cruelly treated Indigenous people and prisoners from Japanese oppression, and to remain engaged on a sufficient scale to be assured an effective voice in the peace settlement. Regardless of one's views on this debate, what is important today is that the soldiers of the 2nd 4th Australian Infantry Battalion, along with the others of the 6th Division, even though some of them, even then, doubted the utility of what they were being asked to do, and even though some of their long-standing comrades who had served since early in the war were sadly killed in this last campaign, nonetheless resolutely and courageously pursued their mission in most arduous and difficult conditions against a skillful and determined if weakened enemy, all the while punctuated with notable acts of valour like Lieutenant Chown and Private Kenner, and conspicuous feats of arms like the capture of Wewak. This memorial to the 2nd 4th Battalion is at Upper Barron on the Atherton Tablelands, and it seems fitting to conclude with it.